Hey everyone, this is Johnny, and I've been diving really deep into buying houses now that I'm actually in the market, I can afford it. And here is the three topics that I want to talk about today. These are three things that have really been on my mind. After you watch these last couple of videos that I talked about, is it ever a good idea to buy a house? Is it good to have a mortgage? Maybe it's better if you pay in cash? And if you want to save, how much do you actually have to save to try to buy the house in cash? And is it even the best idea? So this really focuses on people who already have a house, they have a mortgage. Should you be paying it off early? Should you pay it off completely if you have the cash? If you haven't bought a house yet and you're in my situation, should you try to buy the house completely in cash, or should we get a mortgage on it? So let's take a look at exactly the pros and cons of all of this. So one of the big benefits of buying a house in cash is you can actually negotiate a much better price because they don't, when someone wants to sell a house, if you think about it, they don't want to wait 2 or 3 months to try, to actually get the money for it. Usually people want to move. People, once they're in that mindset of leaving a house, they want out, they want the cash. People get, scared something might happen, or they don't want to just have 2 mortgages, all these downsides. So you can actually get a much better price. And when you're talking about a big purchase like this, even saving 1% could be huge. Speaking of saving money, you save a ton of money, literally thousands of dollars on closing costs, which are all the random fees that you get when you get a mortgage and you have to go through this whole process. You also save a lot of time. You save 45 days of that process of getting a mortgage. You can literally just basically buy the house, say I have cash, transfer it, and you're pretty much done. But the biggest benefit, obviously, is you have no mortgage and you have no rent. So when you buy a house in cash, it is yours. However, as you saw in our last videos, you still have property tax, maintenance, and all these other things. So watch that video if you haven't already to even decide if buying a house is even a good idea or not. So here are the downsides of buying a house in cash. The biggest downside is it completely depletes your liquid cash fund. So whatever money you have in the bank is probably going to go away because you bought this house. So regardless if you have, $100,000 or $500,000 in the bank, when you pay off your house, you probably have close to nothing. And the biggest problem with that is if something happens, if there's an emergency, you're not going to have the money to do anything with it. And you're going to have the loss of opportunity to invest in things. In general, the rule is if the amount of money you're going to make from that cash is going to be less than 4%, which is, kind of on average your mortgage price, you're better off paying a mortgage and basically saving 4% than having the money make you zero. But if you are an active investor and you're making 7%, maybe even 10% in good years, then you have that lost opportunity cost where that money that you would have invested could have made you a lot more money than the mortgage you saved. But there's also some other downsides that people throw out there, like you're not getting that mortgage interest deduction anymore. You're not saving money on your taxes. But if you watch the last video, you'll know that it's not a good savings. It's never a good idea to try to get $30 or $40 back every time you give someone $100. That is just a terrible idea that is people in minds. If you didn't watch that last video, basically you're saving tax on interest paid. But if you never had to pay that interest in the first place, you never would have had to save that money. I mean, it is literally like, think of it this way. Why would you give someone $1,000 in interest to save $300 or $400 in tax? It just doesn't make sense. But the biggest downside of buying in cash is then you might get comfortable and you have no mortgage, you have no liabilities anymore, and you're thinking, okay, well, now I can use this money for other things. I can buy a new car, I can go on vacations, I can just do other things, and it's not forcing you to put more money into the house. So for a lot of people, it really depends on if you are the type to invest money or not, and that is the biggest downside. So what can you actually do instead of buying, this big house and losing all this? There's alternatives, and one is just to buy a cheaper house. I think the biggest upside of buying a house in cash is it forces you to buy a house you can actually afford. And a lot of people don't think about this, but most people cannot afford $1 million house. Most people can't even afford a $500,000 house or a $300,000 house. Yet, in our mind, we're like $300,000 in California or wherever you're from. That is a crappy starter house. I don't want that. I want that nice house that I see on HGTV or on all these shows, or my neighbor has, or my friends have, my coworkers have. If they have a house that's $600,000, why shouldn't I have it? We have the same job with the same income. But the thing is, this person is locked into a 30-year mortgage on their primary residence that they're not renting out. It's not like they're renting out a $600,000, fourplex and collecting rent from it. That is an asset. By us living in this $600,000 house, that is a liability. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, watch my previous video or read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and you can really understand why a house that you actually live in is almost never an investment. It's never an asset. It's always a liability, and it's losing us money. So by buying a house in cash, it really forces us to think, okay, what can I actually afford right now? Maybe I'll level up because I want to live in a nice big house, and that's up to you. But maybe it'll have you start in a smaller house, a starter home, maybe a fixer-upper, or even something like a tiny home, where it's going to cost you a lot less money, and you can take that money and put it into savings. But remember, the downsides to stuff like a tiny home or buying a mobile home is it's like you still, that house value is not going up. It's pretty much like buying a car that you can use. You're buying a house that you can live in, but because you don't own the land and there's no value in there, it's not going up. So biggest pros is you get a reality check of what you can actually afford. The biggest con is you're forced to really put your ego aside. You're going to be living in a 1 or 2 bedroom, small place, while your coworker, your friends, or your neighbor, maybe not your neighbor, but the other people that are in your life are living in these big, beautiful houses that they can't really afford. So what are some of the benefits and the downsides to paying off your mortgage early? So whether you already have a house, you already have a mortgage, you're thinking about paying it off early, or you plan on just buying a house, having a mortgage, and then just paying more every month. So should you pay it off, right? On the left side here, we're looking at the total sum. You're just paying off the whole thing. As we talked about earlier, you get the depleted cash. So you have no money for emergencies or problems. You're not saving money on your taxes. You're losing that opportunity to invest and maybe make 7% or more. And you're not really saving money. And the benefits is you're not paying interest anymore, which is a huge benefit. I would rather, much rather not pay interest at all than save 30% tax on it. Your total cost of buying the house is going to be so much lower. If you buy a $500,000 house in cash, you're pretty much paying $500,000. If you are buying a $500,000 house with a mortgage, your grand total, as we talked about in the last video, and I showed you the math for it, it's going to be 1.2 million. So you're paying more than double when you factor in the interest. You also get to own the house outright. You have no more payments. All great things. So we talked about the pros and cons of that. For some people, it's going to be a great idea just to buy in cash, especially if you have, I would say the part of the key factor is if you can buy the house in cash and still have a bunch of cash left over for emergencies and to invest, it is a good idea. If you don't, if you're going to be depleted, you're going to have less than $50,000 in the bank, don't do it. So extra payments is going to be the other alternative that might be actually better for most people. So you have some of the same, loss opportunities. You have less money in the bank. You're getting less tax deduction and things like that. But, and you also get higher, you have a higher payment every month. So instead of you paying $1,000 or $1,200 for your mortgage, maybe you have to pay an extra $100 a month or something. And so overall, you have less spending cash. So those are the downsides. But the upsides, the pros, are you end up paying way less interest because you're paying off not just the minimum, but you're paying mostly interest for the first half of your term. And if you guys watch this last video, if you guys have seen it, and if you haven't, definitely watch that afterwards, because I break down with the math that you see for the first 15 years, you are paying mostly interest. You're not even paying off the principal of your house, which means most of the money you're paying is just going nowhere. It's literally throwing money down the drain, as we talked about, is paying rent throwing down the drain. Paying interest is worse than paying rent, because at least with paying rent, you're getting something for it. You're getting a place to live. But by putting an extra $100 a month into your mortgage, that is going to directly to your principal, which means your total cost of your house is going to be much lower. You're going to end up paying way less interest than if you didn't put that extra payment in. You'll end up owning the house out much sooner, and it's relatively easy compared to paying off, buying a house in complete cash. It is much easier to pay an extra $100 a month or extra $200 a month or an extra payment than it is to just buy it outright. So how much can you actually save? I love actually showing you the math so you can really just see this example. It's a house that's, or a mortgage that's $120,000. Most of you guys are going to end up having a mortgage that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times bigger than that. So kind of just do that math in your head. 120,000, pretty easy to calculate. If your mortgage is, 240,000, just double it. All right. So if you just pay the normal amount, your minimum. So in this case, it'd be $608 a month. In your case, if your mortgage is double, it might be $1,200 a month. In 30 years, they're gonna pay almost $100,000 in just interest, which is insane, right? Which means if your mortgage is $240,000, you're gonna end up paying almost $200,000 interest. So this is why it's so important to either prepay more, basically prepayment means paying off your mortgage early, so through extra payments. And there's a couple of ways to do this. So the first is make a 13th payment per year. And what does that mean? That basically means instead of paying one payment per month, maybe in January after you get your big bonus, or when you have a really good month at your work or something like that, just pay one completely extra payment. And I'm actually going to give you a tip right after this on how to make that so easy that you won't even believe how easy it is. The math now also shows if you pay an extra $100 a month, how much you'll actually end up saving. How crazy is it that if you just put in an extra $100 a month, which I know is possible for anybody, you can save $27,944 over the term. That's almost $28,000 later for just $100 a month now. So if you do the math for yours, your mortgage is probably double. You end up saving close to $60,000 just by putting $200 extra per month. So it is vital if you have a mortgage or if you plan on having a mortgage to pay more than just your normal mortgage payment, just your minimum. So 2 super easy ways to make that 13th payment a year. It's mind-blowingly easy. One is pay on the 1st of the month instead of the 30th of the month. So instead of paying, at the end of the month when your mortgage is actually due, so for example, so let's say you plan for next year, right? So instead of paying your mortgage the end of January next year, pay that mortgage on January 1st. Yeah, and that means you're going to have to pay the end of December and then January, like the very, next day basically. But if you budget for that and you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work extra hard, over winter. I'm going to save extra money. I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to buy a bunch of Christmas presents that people don't really appreciate or need anyways. I'm just going to take that money and put it towards an extra payment. And then for the rest of the year, you're paying 1 month ahead. You're going to end up paying 13 payments a year instead. But here's what's even easier than that. All you have to do is pay every 2 weeks instead of once a month. And what does that mean? Basically means pay half of your mortgage every 2 weeks, so every time you get your paycheck, instead of waiting to the end of the month and paying the one sum. So let's say your monthly mortgage is $1,000, and it can be double that or triple that or 4 times that, whatever it is. But let's say it's $1,000. Instead of waiting to the end of the month to pay the $1,000, all you have to do is pay $500 every 2 weeks, every single time you get a paycheck. How simple is that? How does that work? It's because there are 26 weeks in the year. A lot of people don't realize that. We think, a month has 2 weeks. It doesn't. It actually has a little bit more. A year doesn't have exactly 24 weeks. It's not, you have that extra. And that is it. Anybody can do this. Like literally anybody can do this. You end up paying, it feels like you're paying the same thing because you're just paying half your mortgage every 2 weeks instead of paying your whole mortgage every month. I want everyone to do this. If you have a mortgage, do this. Start now. Start this month. If you have a friend that has a mortgage, forward them this video. If you want, just take a screenshot of this and explain it to them. Forward them this video. Tag them in it. Share it with them, because this will end up saving them $16,000 per year. I mean, $16,000 total for every single $100,000 they borrowed. So if their mortgage is $500,000, $500,000, they're gonna end up saving a ton of money. That's insane. You are doing them a huge favor by just showing them this little tiny hack. You're gonna end up saving them $60,000 or more just by having them pay when their paycheck comes, instead of at the end of the month like they normally do. And actually, when you think about the compound interest, because you're paying out the principal a little bit earlier, you end up saving even a little bit more. So please do this. So let's talk quickly about how, if let's say you want to save up to buy the house. You're like, Johnny, I love the prepayment principle, but I also like just paying it off. I don't want to have a rent at all. So if you want to save up $100,000, you're gonna have to save up $2,800 a month for 3 years. And if you think that's way too much, and you were like, okay, I'm gonna do that over 5 years, you're still gonna have to save up $1,667 a month for 5 years. And for most people, that's gonna be really hard. If you have a normal job that's not performance based, that is really, really hard to do. I mean, it sounds almost impossible for anyone. And you have to factor in that houses, they rise in value normally with inflation for about 2% a year. In some cities, it goes way up, and in some cities, it goes down. So you have to factor that in. If you live in California, it's probably going to go up, by about 2% or so. So this is really hard. It almost sounds like impossible for most people. But here are the kind of the benefits to it. Is first off, it really forces you to sit down and be like, what kind of house can I actually afford? Can I actually afford this $500,000 house or this $300,000 house? Maybe I should be buying a starter home. Maybe I should be buying a fixer-upper. Maybe I should be buying a smaller house. So that really that really forces you to do it. Or on the other side, it really forces you to make more money. And I know this sounds really hard, but I promise you it's possible. I've done it. I've went from making $1,000 a month to making over 6 figures. And it didn't take me that much time. So if you guys want to know more about that, I have a video that I'm going to share with you guys on how I make as much money as I do now with my online businesses, and how you guys can get started with it as well. But really, it's motivation. If it wasn't for me wanting to save up to buy a house and thinking I wanted to buy it in cash, I never would have ended up saving my first $30,000 or my first $100,000, or now I have $500,000 in the bank right now, mostly investments, but it's all liquid, to be able to buy a house if I want to. And that's why I'm making all these videos. I've done all this research, because I'm really trying to figure out for myself, is it worth it? What are the pros and cons? And I figured, because I'm doing all this research for myself, I might as well be sharing it with all of you. So if you save up the money, the biggest pros is, even if you don't end up buying the house in cash, it forces you to save that money. It forces you to make more money. It forces you to cut your expenses so you have that extra money. And if you're smart, or if you listen to Invest Like a Boss, you have the potential to earn 7 to 10% interest on that money you're saving up while you're saving it. So it's awesome. Everyone should save up money to buy a house. Everyone should save up money to put down a mortgage, or save up money to buy a house in cash, and then come back, watch all the videos that I posted, and you can see, okay, do I actually want to do that or not? But it's good to have that option. And if you guys want to know more, just read JohnnyFD/retired. It shows you how I've made over $500,000. Not just made $500,000, I've actually saved $500,000 into my bank account over the last 4 years. So I'll have a link to that below. You guys can check that out. So this has been a pretty fun video, but this is video 4, I think, now of the real estate series. And this all started because I personally wanted to buy a house, and I'm thinking, what should I do? I wanted to figure out things like, is renting really throwing money down the drain? Is it really worth buying a house? Is it, is it at what it's, what everyone kind of says it is? And here's kind of the summary is, it's a good theory to buy a house in cash. It has a lot of benefits. But for most people, it's actually better if you want to buy a house to either buy a cheaper house in cash that you can just pay it off and still have money in the bank, or it's better just to pay extra mortgage payments if you really, really want to live, in a house. And that's kind of the best of both. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys want to kind of learn more, make sure you watch the other videos in the past that I made on the series, namely is paying rent, throwing money down the drain, and also should you own a house at all in the first place, because I think that's the really biggest question. And then if you want to know more about how I saved up all this money to get to where I am today, to even be able to have the option to buy a $500,000 house in cash, check out my video about making passive income and how I have built all this and how I've made all the money I've made. And last year I made over $300,000 in profit from my businesses. So it's pretty insane to even be able to share this, but I'm really excited. Make sure you subscribe for more, ask any questions in the comments, and share this with a friend. See you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.